The first thing everyone noticed wasn't my arrival. It was the envelope in my hand. Small, cream-colored, wrapped with a simple black ribbon.
No designer logo. E no oversized gift bag. No dramatic presentation.
Just an envelope. By the time I stepped through the ballroom doors at exactly 6:42 p.m., conversations had already begun shifting toward me. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors while a jazz quartet played softly near the stage. The scent of fresh roses mixed with expensive perfume floated through the room. My younger sister, Ava, stood beneath a wall of gold balloons celebrating her 30th birthday. She looked beautiful in an ivory gown, surrounded by photographers and smiling guests. I smiled too, not because I was impressed, because I already knew how this evening would end. If you've ever watched someone underestimate the quiet person in the room, stay with me. Some victories don't begin with loud arguments. They begin with patience. I walked toward the gift table. My heels echoed across the marble floor. Several relatives looked at the envelope before they looked at me. One aunt leaned toward another. "That's all she brought?" Another answered quietly. "I guess attorneys don't make as much money as television says." I heard every word. I kept walking. They had absolutely no idea silence was my strongest language. Before I reached the table, my father raised his champagne glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced proudly, "this celebration cost me exactly $48,750. My daughter deserved nothing less." Applause filled the ballroom. His eyes settled on me for only a second before drifting toward the envelope in my hand. The message landed without another word. Everyone understood it. Expensive gifts mattered. Appearances mattered. Status mattered. I placed my envelope carefully among enormous wrapped boxes decorated with luxury ribbons. It looked almost invisible, exactly as I intended. My mother approached with the graceful smile she reserved for public gatherings. "There you are," she said, kissing my cheek lightly. "You work so much. Sometimes I worry you'll forget how to enjoy life. I enjoy it more than people think." She nodded politely before turning toward nearby guests. "Our Ava has always been our beautiful blessing," she said with practiced warmth. "She lights up every room." Then she glanced back toward me. "And Naomi, well, she always preferred books, contracts, and long hours at the office." Everyone laughed softly. I smiled. I had heard versions of that sentence since childhood. Ava inherited admiration. I inherited expectations. Growing up, relatives often admired Ava's lighter complexion, softer curls, and bright smile before speaking to me at all. They never called me unattractive. They simply described me differently. Serious, strong, mature. Words that somehow meant I wasn't the beautiful daughter. At family reunions, older relatives would tell Ava she belonged on magazine covers. They would tell me I belonged in courtrooms. Even compliments carried comparisons. For years, I convinced myself those differences no longer mattered. Standing inside that ballroom, I realized they still did. Ava finally noticed me and hurried over. "You came. I told you I would." She hugged me tightly. "I'm glad you're here."
So am I.
Unlike the rest of the room, her smile felt genuine, at least for that moment. Then someone slipped an arm around her waist. Ethan Caldwell.
Tall.
Perfect tuxedo. Perfect smile. Perfect confidence. The kind of confidence money often rents before reality sends the bill. "Naomi," he said, "still saving corporations from themselves?" "I try." He chuckled. "That's adorable." I simply looked at him. He continued anyway. Real success looks different outside law offices." Several guests laughed. "I'll keep that in mind." "I mean it," he added. "You spend your whole life reading contracts while people like me actually build wealth." I nodded once. Interesting perspective. He mistook calmness for surrender. People usually did. What they didn't know was I had spent my career studying people who underestimated consequences. The loudest person in a negotiation almost never controlled the outcome. The quiet one usually did. Dinner was announced shortly afterward. Servers carried silver trays through the ballroom while glasses clinked beneath the music. I remained near the cake. The envelope rested exactly where I had left it. Small, simple, unremarkable. My father walked past again. I hope that's not your entire gift. It is. He frowned. Your sister deserves something memorable. I met his eyes. I believe she'll remember it. He shook his head and walked away. If only he understood how true those words were. One by one, guests gathered around the enormous birthday cake. Cameras flashed. Phones rose into the air. The room counted down together before Ava began opening presents. Luxury handbags, diamond earrings, designer watches, vacation vouchers. Each gift earned applause. Finally, she reached mine. Someone whispered loudly enough for half the room to hear. Let's see what the lawyer brought. Ava smiled gently as she untied the black ribbon. She opened the envelope, pulled out the folded documents. Read the first page, then the second. Her smile disappeared. The color drained from her face. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply stared at the papers as though the entire room had suddenly vanished. And for the very first time that evening, every voice around us fell completely silent. Chapter 2. The family's secret. Nobody wanted me to know. The silence that settled over Ava's birthday party carried me back through years I had spent pretending the past no longer mattered. Watching her hands tremble over those papers reminded me that some wounds never disappear. They simply wait for the right moment to reveal themselves. I grew up in a family where love always seemed to arrive with invisible conditions attached. My younger sister, Ava, received opportunities before she even had to ask for them. I learned early that my opportunities would have to be earned, documented, and defended. My father never hid his priorities. Whenever anyone questioned his decisions, he proudly listed everything he had provided for Ava. By the time she turned 30, he had invested more than $620,000 into her private schools, college tuition, startup business, luxury apartment, designer wardrobe, and countless financial rescues whenever another dream became too expensive. He called those expenses investments. When it came to me, every dollar suddenly became a lesson about responsibility. If you want something, he often said, work harder. So I did. I worked before classes. I worked after classes. I graduated from law school without asking my parents for tuition because I knew the answer long before I asked the question. Every payment came from my own checking account. Every loan carried only my name. Oddly enough, that independence became another criticism. Relatives smiled politely while reminding me that Ava was simply more approachable. The comparisons rarely stopped with our careers. They drifted toward our appearances with remarkable ease. Ava has such a beautiful glow. Naomi has stronger features. Ava photographs so well. Naomi looks professional. The words sounded harmless to outsiders. I understood what they truly meant. My darker skin always became part of the conversation without anyone admitting it openly. Colorism wore polite clothing inside my family. It smiled while dividing us. For years, I convinced myself those comments no longer reached me. I was wrong. They never disappeared. They simply became quieter. Everything changed again when Ethan Caldwell entered Ava's life. The first evening I met him, he arrived driving a luxury sports car and wearing confidence like a tailored suit. Everyone admired him instantly. My father called him ambitious. My mother described him as sophisticated. Even distant relatives spoke about his investment company as though he had built an empire from pure brilliance. I listened more than I spoke. Listening had become one of my greatest professional habits. While everyone discussed Ethan's expensive vacations and impressive client list, I asked simple questions about regulatory filings, investment structures, and fiduciary obligations. His answers sounded polished. Too polished. Certain explanations drifted around basic legal details instead of addressing them directly. He changed subjects whenever compliance became part of the conversation. Nobody else noticed. I did. Something felt incomplete. Not illegal. Not yet. Just carefully rehearsed. When I quietly mentioned my concerns to my parents, my father laughed. You're acting like a lawyer instead of a sister. My mother nodded. Not every successful white businessman is hiding something, Naomi. I never said he was. Then stop looking for problems. The conversation ended there. At least for them. For me, it had only begun. What they didn't know was my instincts had protected clients from corporate fraud more than once.
Patents rarely lied. People did.
Months later, I visited my grandfather at his home. The scent of old books and cedar would fill every room, reminding me of childhood afternoons spent reading beside him while the rest of the family attended social events without us. He always noticed things other people ignored, including me. He poured 2 cups of tea before speaking. They still underestimate you. They've been doing that my entire life. He smiled gently.
Good.
I looked at him with curiosity. Good? The loudest people spend too much energy proving they're powerful. He leaned forward. The quiet ones become powerful. I never forgot what he said next. Never fight loud people with louder words. He paused long enough for every syllable to settle. Fight them with paperwork. Those words stayed with me long after that afternoon ended. Several weeks before his passing, he called me back to his house. His voice sounded weaker than I had ever heard. Inside his study, he unlocked an antique wall safe hidden behind an oil painting. He removed several thick folders secured with colored tabs. Property deeds, ownership certificates, corporate records, family trust documents. Every page had been organized with extraordinary precision.
He placed them into my hands.
I've spent decades protecting this family. His eyes met mine. Now it's your turn. I wanted to ask questions. Instead, he gently closed the folders. Not today. Before I left, he handed me one final envelope containing the combination to the safe. Open everything when the time is right. After his funeral, I couldn't bring myself to return. The grief settled too heavily inside that house. The safe remained locked. The files remained untouched. Months passed. Then one evening, after another uncomfortable family dinner where Ethan proudly discussed expanding his investment business, I drove to my grandfather's empty home. The silence inside felt familiar. Dust floated through narrow beams of evening sunlight. My hands remained steady as I entered the combination. The heavy steel door clicked open. One by one, I removed every folder he had protected. Near the very bottom rested a single document inside a sealed evidence sleeve. I unfolded it carefully. My heartbeat slowed instead of racing. There, printed clearly above a bold signature line, was one name I never expected to find. Ethan Caldwell. Chapter 3. The evidence no one knew I had the moment I left my grandfather's empty house. I stopped thinking like a granddaughter and started thinking like an attorney. For days, I carried the documents with me without opening every folder. Grief has a strange way of slowing even the strongest people. Every page reminded me of the only person who had believed in me without asking me to prove my worth. When I was finally ready, I cleared my dining room table, brewed a pot of black coffee, and began reading. By sunrise, I understood why my grandfather had trusted only me. Some documents were routine. Others were extraordinary. Hidden among trust records, corporate filings, and handwritten notes were transactions that didn't belong together. Names repeated too often. Companies appeared and disappeared within months. Money flowed through businesses that existed only on paper. One name appeared over and over. Ethan Caldwell. I didn't assume guilt. I verified facts. That was the difference between emotion and law. Over the next several weeks, I compared public filings with private records my grandfather had preserved for years. Every discrepancy led to another question. Every answer uncovered another layer. Eventually, a disturbing pattern emerged. Investments connected to Ethan repeatedly involved vulnerable clients who believed they were securing their futures. Retirees, widows, families that had spent decades building modest savings. Some of them had already lost everything. That realization sat heavily on my chest. This was no longer about my family. It was about people who had trusted the wrong person. I refused to make accusations without proof. Instead, I built a timeline. Every transfer, every signature, every corporate amendment, every account movement that could be independently verified. My apartment slowly transformed into a war room. Sticky notes covered one wall. Legal pads filled another. Color-coded folders stacked neatly across my desk, while my laptop displayed spreadsheets that stretched for hundreds of entries. Nobody outside my office knew what I was doing. My family certainly didn't. They believed I was simply working another demanding case. In a way, I was. Only this client had been my own family all along. Whenever frustration tempted me to move faster, I remembered my grandfather's voice. Fight them with paperwork. Those words became my discipline. Not once did I call Ethan. Not once did I warn Ava. Not because I wanted revenge. Because incomplete evidence helps the guilty more than the innocent. Months later, I drove to visit Judge Harold Bennett, a retired federal judge who had mentored me since my first year practicing law. He welcomed me into his study without asking unnecessary questions. You've brought boxes, he observed. I've brought concerns. He smiled faintly. The heavier the boxes, the heavier the concerns. For 3 days, we reviewed documents together. He challenged every assumption I made. Can you prove this? Not yet. Then it isn't evidence. He pushed every conclusion until only verified facts remained. When we finished, he leaned back quietly. You've done careful work. I still feel like something is missing. It usually is. He pointed toward a transfer record. Follow the money again. I did. The missing piece revealed itself only after another week. The transactions weren't random. They formed a deliberate sequence. Money entered one company, passed through another, and disappeared into businesses with no genuine operations. The structure appeared sophisticated. The intent did not. Piece by piece, my evidence grew stronger. I organized certified copies of property records. I assembled trust amendments signed years before anyone imagined this conflict. I preserved financial statements exactly as they appeared. Every email was printed. Every timeline cross-referenced. Every conversation legally documented. By then, I understood something my family never had. Truth becomes powerful only when it can survive scrutiny. Without documentation, it remains opinion. With documentation, it becomes undeniable. People often imagine justice arriving through dramatic speeches or emotional confrontations. Real justice usually arrives inside organized binders. Quietly, patiently, methodically. I considered exposing everything immediately. The temptation lasted less than 5 minutes. A rushed accusation would only create confusion. A carefully timed disclosure would create clarity. That difference mattered. So I waited. Not because I was afraid. Because timing is sometimes the final piece of strategy. As Ava's birthday approached, I made one final decision. I purchased a simple cream-colored envelope instead of an expensive gift box. Inside, I placed documents that would answer questions nobody had even thought to ask. The first pages represented hope. The remaining pages demanded truth. Nothing about the envelope looked valuable. That was precisely why it worked. People often overlook the smallest package in the room. They assume significance always arrives wrapped in luxury.
My family believed that too.
They had absolutely no idea the most important birthday gift would not sparkle under party lights. It would change everything instead. On the morning of the celebration, I sealed the envelope, tied a narrow black ribbon around it, and whispered one promise to myself.
No anger, no revenge.
Only truth. Then I walked out the door, carrying nothing except paper, patience, and the quiet certainty that before the night ended, someone would finally see the people around them for who they really were. Chapter 4. The silence that won the ballroom changed before anyone realized it had. One moment, crystal glasses chimed with laughter and birthday wishes. The next, conversations dissolved into uncertain whispers as my sister continued staring at the papers I had placed inside the plain envelope. The jazz quartet kept playing for another 30 seconds before the musicians slowly lowered their instruments, sensing the celebration had become something entirely different. I remained exactly where I was. My breathing stayed steady. My expression never changed. Across the room, I watched Ethan take 2 confident steps toward Ava. He smiled the way people smile when they believe every problem can be solved with charm. "Baby," he said, reaching for the documents, "don't let legal paperwork ruin your birthday." Naomi loves creating drama. Ava didn't hand him the pages. Instead, she looked from the documents to me, then back again. "What is this?" she asked quietly. "It's everything you deserve to know before making another promise." Before she could continue, Ethan laughed loudly enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "There it is." He pointed toward me with exaggerated amusement. I knew this was coming. Several guests exchanged uncertain glances. He turned to them as though he were delivering a speech. "My future sister-in-law has spent her whole career chasing technicalities. That's what lawyers do when they can't build anything meaningful." A few uncomfortable chuckles floated through the crowd. He looked directly at me. "You really thought a stack of papers would impress people?" I folded my hands in front of me. "I thought facts might." His smile widened. "Facts?" He shook his head dramatically. "You've always been jealous of what Ava and I built together." I said nothing. He continued. "You've been desperate for attention since law school." Still, I remained silent. The silence unsettled him more than any argument could have. He expected resistance. He expected anger. He expected me to defend myself. Instead, I simply watched him. People often mistake silence for weakness. Professionally, I had learned the opposite. Silence gives impatient people room to reveal themselves. My father finally stepped forward. "Naomi," he said firmly, "whatever misunderstanding this is, apologize now." I met his eyes. "I have nothing to apologize for." He frowned. "Then explain yourself." "I already have." He looked confused. "The documents are explaining everything." The room fell quiet again. Ethan scoffed loudly. "Those papers are fabricated." No response. "They're incomplete." No response. "They're meaningless." Still nothing. He glanced around the ballroom, searching for support. "They don't prove anything." Nobody answered him. The retired judge who had mentored me stood near the back of the room with his arms folded. Several attorneys quietly continued reading copies of the documents Ava had begun passing around. Investment partners who had arrived expecting a birthday celebration suddenly examined financial schedules with remarkable attention. No one interrupted. No one defended Ethan. He interpreted their silence as permission to keep talking. That was his greatest mistake. They're only upset because they don't understand investment structures, he declared. He laughed again. Sometimes money moves internationally before coming back into domestic portfolios. A few attorneys looked at each other. Ethan kept speaking. Everyone uses holding companies. He shrugged casually. Sometimes offshore entities make transactions easier. Another pause spread across the ballroom. His confidence remained untouched. I've restructured accounts for tax efficiency dozens of times. He smiled proudly. That's just smart business. I watched several board members lower their eyes toward the documents again. One attorney quietly circled a paragraph with his pen. Ethan never noticed. He continued talking. Clients don't need every detail. His voice grew stronger. They only care about returns. Someone near the entrance quietly stopped recording the birthday celebration and started recording Ethan instead. He still didn't realize what was happening. What they didn't know was I had stopped thinking about winning several weeks earlier. Now I was simply observing the truth arrive on its own. My mother stepped toward me. Please, she whispered, don't embarrass this family. I answered softly enough that only she could hear. The truth isn't embarrassing. She looked away first. Across the room, Ava slowly turned another page. Each sentence seemed to remove another layer of certainty from her expression. She looked at Ethan. Did you use my name on investment paperwork? He answered too quickly. It was only temporary. The room became even quieter. He corrected himself. It wasn't like that. Nobody spoke. He rushed forward again. Every successful business adjusts paperwork. Another damaging sentence. I intended to update everything later. Another admission. His own confidence had become evidence. I glanced toward the long reception table where my leather portfolio rested beside untouched champagne glasses. Without urgency, I walked across the polished floor. Every pair of eyes followed me. The ballroom felt unusually warm beneath the chandelier lights, yet the air remained perfectly still. I opened the portfolio. Inside rested a small black flash drive. Nothing about it appeared important. I returned to the center of the room. Ethan folded his arms confidently.
What now?
Without changing my expression, I placed the flash drive on the white linen tablecloth between us. The sound was almost impossible to hear. A tiny piece of plastic. A very heavy truth.
He stared at it.
Then at me. For months, he said, forcing another smile, you've built this fantasy that I'm some criminal. I finally spoke. My voice remained calm. Would you like me to play your own voice? Every sound inside the ballroom disappeared. Even the air conditioning seemed to fade.
No glasses clinked. No phones vibrated.
No whispers remained. Ethan looked at the flash drive as though it had suddenly become dangerous. His confident posture shifted almost imperceptibly. The smile disappeared first. Then the color from his face. For the first time since I had met him, he searched for words instead of finding them. Nobody rescued him. Nobody defended him. My father remained motionless. My mother looked down at the floor. Ava quietly closed the folder resting in her hands. Then, somewhere beyond the ballroom doors, I heard the unmistakable sound of polished shoes moving across marble floors in perfect, deliberate rhythm. The doors opened. Several federal investigators stepped inside, each carrying official credentials. The celebration was over. Chapter 5. The gift my sister never expected. The ballroom remained silent long after the federal investigators entered. Nobody reached for another glass of champagne. Nobody returned to the birthday cake. The celebration had ended the moment the truth walked through those doors. I watched the investigators identify themselves with calm professionalism before speaking privately with several attorneys who had already reviewed portions of the documents. They accepted copies of the records without urgency, as though every step had been carefully anticipated. Because it had. Months of preparation rarely produced dramatic movements. It produced orderly ones. Across the room, Ava still held the envelope with both hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she refused to let it fall. She looked at me, then back at the papers, then at Ethan. Finally she spoke. "Tell me this isn't true." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it again, then forced another smile that no longer convinced anyone. "They're twisting ordinary business transactions." Ava slowly lifted another page. "My name is here. It was temporary. My signature authorization is referenced. I was protecting us." She looked directly into his eyes. "You never asked me." He had no answer. The silence between them felt heavier than every accusation spoken that evening. I walked toward my sister without rushing. Every step reminded me that I had imagined this conversation hundreds of times. None of those versions had prepared me for the sadness on her face. She wasn't mourning money. She was mourning trust. When I stopped beside her, I gently pointed to the first section inside the folder. "Read the highlighted paragraph." She followed the line with her eyes. "The family trust established by our grandfather transferred its protected assets directly to her, beyond Ethan's legal reach. The provisions had been strengthened months earlier through valid amendments and independent witnesses, ensuring no future spouse or outside business partner could claim ownership without her informed written consent." Her breathing caught. "You changed this?" "I protected what Grandpa built." "You protected it for me?" I nodded. "For both of us." Fresh tears filled her eyes. She continued reading. Every page answered another question before she could ask it. Property records, trust amendments, independent legal certifications. Every document fit together like pieces of a puzzle our grandfather had started assembling years before. The final section explained why I had waited until her birthday. Not to embarrass her. To reach her before irreversible decisions were made. She pressed the papers against her chest. "You've known for months." "I suspected something for months." "You could have destroyed him immediately." "I could have." "Why didn't you?" I looked around the ballroom before answering. "Because accusations create arguments." I paused. "Evidence creates choices." She lowered her head. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic. Quiet tears. The kind that arrive when a carefully protected illusion finally disappears. "I thought," she whispered. "I know. I thought he loved me." I rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I believe he loved what he could gain." She cried harder. Not because she had lost an inheritance. Because she had discovered someone had spent years protecting her while she never realized protection was necessary. That realization broke something inside her. It also began repairing something else. Nearby, my father finally regained his voice. He walked toward us with the determined expression he always wore when he believed authority alone could solve a problem. "This ends now." Neither of us answered. He looked directly at me. "You're an attorney." "Yes." "You understand discretion." "I understand accountability." He lowered his voice. "Fix this quietly." I met his eyes without anger. "What exactly would you like me to fix?" "The investigation." "I can't." "The publicity." "I won't." "Our family's reputation." "Our reputation wasn't damaged tonight." His jaw tightened. "Naomi." The truth simply became visible. For the first time in my life, he had no immediate response. Status had always been his language. Facts spoke louder. My mother approached next. She looked exhausted. Her carefully composed smile had disappeared. "Why would you do this during your sister's birthday?" I didn't choose the timing to hurt her. "You humiliated this family." I answered calmly. "I didn't embarrass this family." The words settled heavily between us. "I documented it." She stared at me in disbelief. You always have to be right.
No.
I only needed the truth to be accurate. She looked away. I recognized the moment. For years, she had defended appearances over honesty. Tonight, appearances had finally lost. Around us, conversations slowly resumed, but they sounded different now. No one discussed decorations. No one admired the music. Guests quietly reflected on everything they had witnessed. Several investment partners thanked the investigators for responding quickly. Two elderly couples spoke with one of the attorneys after recognizing names connected to accounts they had trusted for years. What they didn't know was those conversations mattered just as much as anything happening inside our family. If the documents prevented even one additional retirement from disappearing, if one widow kept her savings, if one grandparent avoided financial ruin, every difficult moment had been worth it. I glanced toward the enormous birthday cake still standing untouched beneath golden lights. Hours earlier, everyone believed the greatest gift would arrive wrapped in expensive paper. Instead, the smallest envelope in the room had carried something impossible to measure. Freedom, protection, choice. A future our grandfather had hoped someone would defend. Ava slowly folded every document and placed them back inside the envelope with extraordinary care. She stepped toward me. Then, without saying a word, she wrapped her arms around me. I hesitated only briefly before embracing her. For years, an invisible wall had stood between us, built by comparisons, strengthened by favoritism, protected by silence. Tonight, the first cracks had finally appeared. She leaned back, wiping tears from her face. I kept believing everyone else. I said nothing. I thought you were distant. I gently shook my head. I was waiting. For what? For the day you were ready to see. She looked down at the envelope one final time before meeting my eyes again. Her voice trembled with honesty instead of confusion. I never deserved a sister like you. Chapter 6. What remained after the storm 6 months can feel like an entire lifetime when the truth finally refuses to stay hidden. The ballroom where my sister's birthday had nearly become the happiest day of her life slowly faded into memory, but the decisions made that evening continued shaping every life connected to it. Justice did not arrive overnight. It arrived one document, one hearing, and one verified fact at a time. That was exactly how my grandfather would have wanted it. I returned to my law office the following Monday as though nothing extraordinary had happened. My calendar remained full. My clients still needed contracts reviewed, negotiations completed, and businesses protected. The difference was that my own family had finally learned what I had spent my entire career believing. Truth does not need to shout. It only needs the opportunity to be heard. News surrounding Ethan's financial empire changed almost weekly. Regulatory investigations expanded as additional records surfaced through lawful discovery and independent audits. Investors who had once praised his confidence now demanded answers supported by documentation instead of promises. His carefully polished reputation disappeared far faster than it had been built. Luxury cars were replaced by legal appointments. Magazine photographs gave way to courtroom sketches. The image he had protected so fiercely could not survive verified facts. Appearances never do. My father experienced a quieter downfall.
No dramatic confrontation.
No public humiliation. Business associates simply stopped calling as often. Invitations became less frequent. Conversations grew noticeably shorter. For the first time in my life, I watched him realize that influence earned through appearances can disappear just as quickly. Respect earned through character lasts much longer. My mother struggled differently. For years, she had guided every family disagreement by controlling the story before anyone else could speak. Now that strategy no longer worked. Too many people had witnessed the truth for themselves. Excuses became ineffective. Denial became impossible. Eventually, she stopped trying to rewrite history. Silence became her only remaining defense. The greatest change belonged to Ava. Healing did not happen in a single conversation. Trust rarely returns that quickly. Instead, we rebuilt our relationship one honest discussion at a time. We met for breakfast every Saturday morning. Sometimes we talked about childhood. Sometimes we talked about our grandfather. Sometimes we simply enjoyed coffee without pretending the past had never happened. For the first time, we were learning who we actually were without comparisons standing between us. That may have been the greatest victory of all. Several months later, we gathered inside the library our grandfather had loved most. Together, we signed the final documents establishing the Carter Legacy Scholarship. The trust would provide financial assistance each year to Black students pursuing careers in law, accounting, finance, and public service. Education had changed my life. Now it could change someone else's. As I signed my name, I remembered something my grandfather once told me while placing those old files into my hands. Knowledge protects people long after money disappears. He was right. Money can be stolen. Titles can disappear. Status can fade. Knowledge remains. Looking back now, I understand our family was never truly divided by money. We were divided by favoritism, by colorism spoken softly enough that people pretended it wasn't real, by the dangerous belief that appearances mattered more than integrity. Those ideas nearly destroyed everything my grandfather spent a lifetime building. Fortunately, truth proved stronger. If you're listening to my story today because you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or judged before anyone took the time to know you, I want you to remember something. People may ignore your value. They may misunderstand your silence. They may even convince themselves that your kindness is weakness. Let them. Keep learning. Keep building. Protect your peace with wisdom instead of anger. Document your work. Honor your principles. When the right moment comes, you will never need revenge to prove your worth. The truth will speak clearly enough on its own. And when it does, the people who underestimated you will finally understand that quiet strength was never weakness. It was preparation. As my sister and I walked out of the library together that afternoon, the sunlight felt warmer than it had in years. Neither of us carried anger anymore. We carried understanding. Some gifts are wrapped in expensive paper. Others arrive inside ordinary envelopes, waiting patiently for the right hands to open them. The greatest gift I gave my sister wasn't wealth. It was the truth that finally set us both free.